if you've ever been in the military and you desperately need a haircut, and for whatever the reason, you decide to take matters into your own hands and it didn't work out for you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That's how I ended up with this egregious high and tight that I had to go back and fix the next day because I missed a huge spot in the back, or another instance where I basically destroyed my scalp with a Gillette razor. So, what is up? It is Nathaniel Shimkovitz, devout patriot and science fiction author, here today with another bit of writing advice / analysis, rant, whatever you want to call it. But if you like this style of content, go ahead and give me a like, share it with your friends, follow me on Patreon and Subscribestar, and wherever I share this, just to keep up on my content. If you go to Patreon and Subscribestar, you get these videos a week early, and you help me support the team that helps make this content possible, mainly my audiobook adaptation of The Shroud of Peace. So, today I'm actually going to do something a little different. I'm going to start with a bit of a disclaimer. There may be some things I say in here that may offend some people. I may piss a couple of people off with some of the things I say. I'm not going to be political, or at least I'm not going to try and be very political in this statement, but this may offend a few people. If you are, obviously, you're free to click away at any moment. I'm not holding a gun to your head saying that you have to watch this video. That being said, I would encourage you to keep watching so that you get the full context of this, and that maybe you'll learn something, because I think in these days where we have unprecedented access to information, that we need to seek out sources of information that challenge our worldview. And the more you challenge yourself, kind of the stronger, smarter you become. Maybe you learn something that you never knew before about the world, or you learn something about yourself that you really should have learned earlier. So I'm going to get off my little preachy soapbox here, and I'm going to get right into this. Today, I want to talk about allegory in science fiction. Now, you remember back in my sci-fi versus fantasy video where I was actually wearing this exact suit. Yeah, I was wearing this exact suit. I talked about how science fiction was a strong vehicle for allegory. And now I frame this as kind of a strength, but I'm here to tell you why, some of the pitfalls of doing that. So we're going to start with a story that I have. Back in 2018, about 2 years ago today, I was in Los Angeles at the LA Book Festival doing a book signing for The Shroud of Peace. And I remember a woman came up to me and asked for a signed copy of my book, and I was going to do it. She asked me what the book was about. I explained to her what The Shroud of Peace was about. I explained it was a military science fiction thriller, kind of like The Bourne Identity in space, and I think you get the picture if you're listening to the book, or go ahead on Amazon and go pick up a copy and figure it out for yourself. And I remember the thing she asked me right after that, when I mentioned the year, 2585, she looked at me with this kind of sideways look. It's like, I'm surprised you have it set in there, because we're really not long for this Earth. And went on into kind of one of the more extreme environmental positions, borderline like Extinction Rebellion level stuff, before we even had the term Extinction Rebellion. So she goes off into this kind of rant about environmentalism and climate change and all this stuff, and how it was implausible to have this type of book, and asked me how this was possible. And at the end of the day, I just came to the conclusion that, necessity is the mother of all invention, and that essentially that this is not a story about environmentalism. So when talking about allegory, why do I bring this up? I bring this up because, to go to a quote that Tolkien said, I believe I also mentioned in my science fiction versus fantasy video. Why I can't remember that, even though it was only a couple of weeks ago, I don't know. But basically, what Tolkien said was that he always detested allegory. He hated it because he saw allegory as a purpose tool for the author to display domination over the audience. And I completely agree with Tolkien on this. Science fiction, especially today, is a very politically charged genre. You'll have a lot of writers take a science fiction story and essentially cram in their political views into a scenario, to where you'll have a lot of science fiction stories and settings where essentially it's just our world but with more advanced technology. Looking at you, Star Trek Picard, God, But okay, so um, the reason why I bring up that story about the book signing is it brings me to this idea that audiences of modern science fiction expect this. They expect having specific allegories, and almost some of the allegories and beliefs in science fiction have almost become genre tropes to some extent, mostly in the more commercial side of science fiction, a little bit less in the more niche and indie side of science fiction. But in the commercial side, there are political aspirations, and allegories have almost become tropes in that regard. And I just didn't abide by that, because the way that I view stories is that they need to be very focused. They need to be very focused, and this comes to tailoring your audience as well, to where you have to cater to certain people, to where there's a spectrum of science fiction allegories where space opera tends to lean, based on your political spectrum, space opera tends to lean a little bit more to the left, kind of like Star Trek, how a lot of people made the observation that the Federation is a borderline communist society, and the more generic side of military science fiction where it asserts some more right-wing positions. So I'm not going to talk too much about politics of science fiction or political spectrum, or in fact how the diametric scale is stupid, but the main thing that I'm getting at with this is that you're going to have a certain audience that you're going to attract, and their political leanings, whether you realize it or not. The story that you write is going to appeal to different people. There's a famous saying out there that Abe Lincoln did not say. It was actually kind of originated by a French poet named Jacques Savigny. And what the saying is you can fool some people all of the time, but you can't fool everyone all of the time. Or that's an approximation of what he said. Like, go look into that quote. It's actually a pretty interesting story about how that became famous, but whatever. So the point of that is that you can't appeal to everybody at all times. Like in the case of this woman asking me about environmental issues in my story, even though the story is not about that, I can't accommodate every single issue in a science fiction story. When you sit down to write a story, you get your ideas together, and you have a very finite number of themes you get after to help keep it focused. If I try and bring in the entire world, every issue in the world into the story, it's going to be a mess, unfocused, and confusing at best. And if you're writing a very ideologically driven allegory, it's going to over-encumber that even more, to where it becomes less and less like you're writing propaganda and more like you're writing a manifesto. You write manifestos for you. You write propaganda for a wider audience. That's just kind of my thing. I know this sounds a little dystopic and evil for a minute here, but propaganda is meant more as advertisement, to attract people to an idea, and then you sell them a manifesto. That's kind of how that works. I know it sounds evil, especially for a fiction writer to say, but that's kind of the way it is with that. When you sit down and try and insert all these issues into one thing, it's more like you're writing a manifesto. And as a fiction writer, don't do that, because it's sheer hubris. Avoid basically inserting a manifesto of your own political beliefs into your work, where you essentially tackle every issue in the book. I mean, with the way that I try and write my work, you may never uncover my political leanings. Now, you can make inferences based on some of the content I put with you guys and some of my writing, but at the end of the day, though, I try and write stuff that doesn't reflect my political opinion. Or if I have my political opinion in there, I use the scientific method to kind of whittle away and analyze it a little bit. So, in short, you need to tailor, if you're going to write an allegory, tailor your audience, because you can't please everybody with your political allegory. You can't do it, and that's going to bring me to kind of my next. So, in the case of modern, more commercial science fiction, you notice a lot of schisms in the fan communities, mainly with any franchise that starts with the word star. Star Wars, Star Trek, part of it is because, they changed some things. It's not because the fans are nostalgic man babies. It's because they've really changed a lot of the way that these franchises handle issues or handle contemporary issues. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of any of this. There are entire channels and hours upon hours upon hours of content about the communities of Star Wars and Star Trek, toxic fandom, other kind of stuff like that. I'm not going to get into those communities, but that's kind of going to tailor in your audience a little bit, that certain messages are going to do that. Now, in the case of purpose domination of the author, like Tolkien was talking about, and what I say for avoiding creating a political manifesto with your work, you ultimately have to think about just how you ground your allegory, how you ground your themes. To where even just, and again, I hate doing specific examples, but just look at the more contemporary Star Treks, just things that happen in the story and things that happen behind the scenes. So one of the criticisms labeled with Star Trek Picard recently is that the world feels incredibly shallow. While it canonizes old Star Trek, which is something that I should in theory like, but I didn't really watch too much of Picard. I watched like the first couple episodes. I couldn't stand it. So the thing that I didn't like about it was that the world felt really weird. It just felt like our world, but with significantly more advanced technology. And honestly, it's kind of boring. It's lame. It's shallow. At best. And while it may be seen as dumbing down or anything like that, we're fiction writers. We're science fiction writers specifically. We should be challenging our readers a little bit more than just giving them something cheap and accessible and shallow. And just, that's a criticism labeled at it. If you have an allegory that's far too rooted in the present and you apply it to a science fiction setting, your whole world just feels really shallow. The breadth of an ocean with the shallowness of with the depth of a puddle is essentially what happens when you write these very contemporary-based allegories about this. Or, if you look back a little further in Star Trek history, behind the scenes, look to Discovery, where around the time of season 1 of that show were coming out, the writers and producers of that show basically came out and said that the Klingons were an allegory for Trump supporters. I'm not going to take a side on that one, but you can understand objectively why this would piss a lot of people off, why this would anger a lot of people on both sides of the equation. It angers the Trump supporters because the writers are saying, hey, that we were basically vilifying you. It makes the writers look bad because they're just being unprofessional, acting with such malice toward people who could potentially be their customers, especially the way that they marketed that show as this is something for everybody. And then people who just wanted good writing and get presented with this incredibly present-based allegory. That word is going to come up quite a bit. It's something called presentism. If you've taken a history course in college or you consider yourself a scholar of history, you'll know what this is. Presentism is essentially taking contemporary values or contemporary perspectives on an issue and applying it to a different time period, and it makes no jolly sense. So that's like the equivalent of taking our modern perceptions of race relations and trying to paste them onto people during the triangle trade in the 17th and 18th centuries. It just doesn't add up. So the issue you have with this is, again, making these present-day allegories. Like I said before, it's going to piss off a lot of people. But it's also going to make your world seem incredibly flat, and your work will not age well. Admittedly, one of my favorite books is The Forever War. And if you've never heard of this, go out there and read it. It's a science fiction classic. But basically, that whole book is just an allegory for United States societal change in the Vietnam War during the mid-1960s to the early 70s. And I love that book, but it really hasn't aged too well. in some extent. It's while you can find a lot of parallels between Vietnam and the War on Terror, it doesn't exactly line up, especially because a lot of the people who protested the Vietnam War actually ended up supporting the War on Terror. So, I really have nothing for that. I'm not going to get too down in the bushes for this. So, I'm going to leave it off on kind of a note like this. Should you use an allegory in science fiction? Well, it depends on how specific you want your audience to be. If you want to cater to more of a niche audience on a very specific political plane, go for it. If you're looking for mass audience appeal, I would advise you to kind of minimize your use of allegory, or if you do, you have to try and keep it balanced to some extent, and then you'll be able to affect more people, because the more one-sided you make your allegory, the more people you're going to push away from your work. The other thing that I would have is that, please, writers, for the love of God, don't write a manifesto. Don't over-politicize your work. Don't talk down to your audience, because at the end of the day, while you write for your own enjoyment, you write for your audience to a certain extent. Don't talk down to them because your audience have very specific experience in lives that have them to develop the system beliefs that they do, just like you. So don't denigrate someone's position for the sake of your own pleasure. But really, that's my opinion. What do you think? Go ahead, leave me a comment, tell me that I'm a horrible person for saying these things and how this may have shattered your little worldview. I really don't have too much else on the subject. One note I do have, there are a lot of hospitals out there that are critically short of blood during these absurd times we live in. If you're able to, please go donate. I'll probably put a few links in the description, at least for local places you can help out with this. I recently did it for the first time, and I didn't think it was that bad at all. Like, if you're looking for something to do, maybe look into ways that you can help people. There are lots of people making PPE for the COVID-19 outbreak, but if you just feel useless, look for any way that you can help your local community and challenge yourself as much as you can. Seek out a piece of information that you wouldn't have otherwise. Read about something that you weren't interested in, or try to expand your skill base during this time. But really, that's all I got. Stay safe, stay sane.